Good morning, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode 10 of Be With Me. This is season 11. That is, we're in the book of 2 Corinthians. And today is going to be a fun one because we are going to have a covenant competition. We're in chapter 3 of 2 Corinthians. Turn there now if you wish. Paul is on this argument that there is a new covenant. And he says to the Corinthian people, you guys are a letter from Christ delivered by us. And it's written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of the human hearts. He asked a little bit earlier, then he's going to answer this question, that who's sufficient to bring you this good news? So he speaks very humbly there, and then he answers it, and he says, our sufficiency is from God, who has made us competent to be ministers of a new covenant. So he starts humble, but then he realizes, no, the Lord has called and he's equipped us, and then he kind of turns into this very confident teacher. Now, here's the comparison today. We're going to compare the old covenant with the new covenant, and we're going to talk about what's the covenant called, who delivers the covenant, what's the real name of the covenant, what is the result of the covenant, and what characteristic of God is displayed. So let's start with the old covenant. So first of all, we call it an old covenant. The deliverer of that old covenant was a guy by the name of Moses. Now the problem here is what happens in today's passage. He says this is a killer covenant. So let's read that part. Now, if the ministry of death, he's talking about the old covenant here, carved in letters on stone, came with such glory that the Israelites could not gaze at Moses' face because of its glory, which was being brought to an end. Will not the ministry of the Spirit, so now he's comparing the new covenant, the covenant of the Spirit, have even more glory? For if there was glory in the ministry of condemnation, another name for the old covenant, the ministry of righteousness, another name for the new covenant, must far exceed it in glory. Indeed, in this case, what once had glory has come to have no glory at all. So the old covenant is losing its glory, it's fading out, because of the glory that surpasses it. So the new covenant is more glorious, shiny, and bright. Indeed, because of the glory that surpasses it. For what was being brought to an end came with glory, much more will what is permanent have glory. So let's compare the old covenant with the new covenant. So this old covenant was brought to us from a human standpoint by Moses. And the problem is, he says the letter kills. And a snarky name for the old covenant is a killer covenant. The problem is the killer, what it kills is it kills us because we can't make it to God. The covenant is like a sign. We're walking down this road and there's a branch off the road that says, hey, you cannot make it this way. You got to find a different way. And that happens with the new covenant. So he says the old covenant is also known as the ministry of death and the ministry of condemnation. It's such a bummer. Now, it is accompanied by a little bit of glory. That is, we have a God who sees us. We have a God who comes down. We have a God who makes a covenant. The problem is, in the old covenant, he made it with a bunch of covenant breakers. The good news is he does tell us that, hey, you can't make it this way. Now, he's going to get to this glory that's on Moses' face, and he eventually has to be veiled. But hold that thought. That we're not going to have time for that today. Then the other critical element of the old covenant is the length of it. He says in verse 7 that it is being brought to an end. In verse 11, it is being brought to an end, so that the glory is coming to it. The glory that is represented by God coming down and God's characteristic being displayed in it, that glory is coming to an end. So it is a way to describe the old covenant is a gone covenant. It's not an old covenant. It's a no covenant. There is no old covenant. It is gone. So you don't really even have a choice. So you don't have a choice between, hey, I want to go with a new covenant or the old covenant. There is no old covenant. So there really is only the choice between a new covenant and no covenant. All right, let's talk about the new covenant. So who is the person, who is the human deliverer? Unlike Moses, it's this Paul, it's the pastors, it's the elders, it's those he has made competent to bring that covenant to us. And the result isn't killing, it's giving life. It's the Spirit indwelling and giving life. Another name for it is it's a ministry of the Spirit. It's the ministry of righteousness as opposed to ministry of death and condemnation. And the accompanying characteristic of God is, yes, glory. Oh my goodness, how much? Well, more than the other covenant, because it's something that God does for us. Remember, in the Old Testament, covenants are kind of like bilateral agreements. You do and I do. The problem is that God always picked people to make his covenants with, and we always broke the covenant. And the only reason we got saved by the skin of our teeth is that God elected to have hesed and not smash us when we deserved it. But now the covenant in the New Testament is a little bit different. These are unilateral covenants made by God, like a will is, like a last will and testament, and they are done for us. And all we have to say, our part in it isn't, to do anything other than just to say yes. All right, so let's talk about the length of the covenant. The length of this covenant, the new covenant, is permanent. This is not going to go away. So comparing and contrasting, a bilateral covenant, it doesn't work. The old covenant just reveals God's character. The bad news is it's to us, and it ends up being a killer covenant or a stone cold killer covenant. You can't earn it. You can't do it. You can't work your way up to it. You can't work your way towards God's great. And if you think you can, go ahead and try today. You won't even make it to lunchtime. So the old covenant is glorious. How so? Well, it's glorious in its killerness. It's glorious in its inheritance. Don't you want the new covenant, the one that's full of life and indwelling of the Spirit and imputed righteousness that's going to last forever and more purely describe God's glory? Don't you want that inheritance? How much does it cost? It's free. It only requires one thing, you saying yes. I love in the Old Testament how people sometimes say, hey, I don't like the God of the Old Testament. That's not true. What you really don't like is you don't like the covenant of the Old Testament. Nobody does, because it's temporary and it's full of death and full of condemnation, and it just points you towards another one. So you're right. Though it was glorious, it's fading, and in fact, it's faded so far, it's gone. The covenant of the New Testament wins hands down. The covenant competition is no competition at all. Thanks for listening.